John 8:58. Is the New World Translation just so terrible that it can't even get Jesus' words, ego and me, right? Is that really the case? We've got people like Dr. James White. We've got people like Robert M. Bowman Jr. We've got Trinitarians all over the place, constantly claiming NWT is inferior in John 8:58 because it doesn't use I am. I'm going to show it's exactly the opposite. That translations that use I am are showing they don't understand the Greek text as good as those who handled the NWT. It doesn't matter how many degrees. You could have 1,000 different degrees in languages, including Greek. If you translate John 8:58 as before Abraham came to be I am, you don't know Greek. Or you're so biased and beholden to post-biblical doctrines, you can't bring yourself to translate Greek. Let's take a look. Let's see whether or not the NWT in John 8:58 is inferior or superior. Because all over the place, these Trinitarian scholars, right? The learned people, no one questions that, right? But we can question whether or not they're right when it comes to the product of their learning. Right? If you have so much knowledge, Trinitarian scholars, what's the problem with your learning? Why can't you apply it right? Let's take a look. Let's put John 8:58 into the light. First, let's read it in context. Then we'll discuss the grammatical issues. Then we'll talk about who has translated it how and why and what the grammars have had to say on these issues. Because if you look online and you pull up John 8:58, it's universally condemned by Trinitarians, the NWT's translation of John 8:58, and yet it is superior. They are inferior. They just can't bring themselves to humble themselves because of all their learning, all the condemnation and hate that they have been burning with when it comes to Jehovah's Witnesses. It's disgusting when you consider what they have done and the lies that they have spread, not only over John 1:1, we'll get to it, but John 8:58. Starting in verse 53, reading the NWT, the Jews state, "You are not greater than our father Abraham who died, are you? Also, the prophets died. Who do you claim to be?" Jesus answered, "If I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. Trinitarians, is Jesus God? Then why is his glorifying himself nothing? It is his Father who glorifies him. He," this is Jesus talking about someone else, the Father who glorifies him, the glory that actually means something, since his means nothing. He who you Jews who worship the God of the Bible like I do, he who you say is your God. Trinitarians, did the Jews say their God was a Trinity? No, they didn't, did they? And that's why Jesus right here, instead of making it clear like you want to hear, that the God they worship is him, or at least him and the Father and the Holy Spirit, no, he differentiates his glorifying of himself with the glory of the Father. And he says the Father is the one you, the ones I'm talking to, say is your God. That's the one who we say is our God. 1 Corinthians 8:6. One God, the Father, Trinitarians. Stop adding to it. The Jews, according to Jesus, believed the Father was their God. Right after Jesus differentiated himself and the glory of himself with the glory from the Father who is their God. And yet you have not known him. They know him as their God, but they don't know him because they don't know he sent Jesus as the Son of God. I know him, and if I said I do not know him, I should be like you, a liar. Notice Trinitarians, they have not known him. The one who they said was their God is a him, the Father, one person. Like Galatians 3:20, one person. Like 1 Corinthians 8:6, one person. And it's not including Jesus. It's the Father. But Jesus knows him. And if he said he didn't know him, he should be like them, a liar. But he does know him. Not a what, Trinitarians. Not a one what. A him. The Father. The Son knows him and is observing his word. Abraham, their father, your father, talking to the Jews who claimed his God, their God, the Father, rejoiced greatly in the prospect of seeing my day. And he saw it and rejoiced. Therefore the Jews said to him, you are not yet 50 and still you have seen Abraham? So where are we at this point? Jesus is referring back to Abraham, right? And he's contrasting Abraham, who got it right, with the Jews who are getting it wrong. The one they claim is their God, the Father, they don't know him the way Abraham knew him. And looking forward to the day of the Messiah, the prospect of seeing his day, he saw that day and rejoiced. And that made the Jews say, you're not 50 and you've seen Abraham? Right? So the Jews recognize that Jesus is telling them he saw Abraham rejoice. He says it right here in his own voice. Abraham rejoiced when he saw my day. He saw it and rejoiced. The Jews realize what he's saying. Well, wait a minute. You're not even 50. Abraham was a long time ago. How have you seen Abraham rejoice? Answer. Most truly I say to you, before Abraham came into existence, I have been. Or as the Trinitarians repeatedly mistranslate this text, I am. And it says they picked up stones to hurl at him, but he hid and went out of their temple. Then about 10 verses later, in John 9:9, a blind man uses the exact same expression, ego eimi, used right here at the last part of John 8:58, but translated, I have been. And that's because in John 8:58, ego eimi, unlike in John 9:9, or John 8:24, or in John 4, or in John 6, or in John 18, where Jesus is using ego eimi like the blind man in John 9:9 to introduce himself as the Christ, whereas the blind man is introducing himself as the blind man they're seeking. It's connected with an expression of past time. And that changes things. That is now making ego eimi a present verb, eimi, a part of a well-known Greek idiom that the Trinitarian scholars, with all their learning, all their Greek education, all their degrees, fail consistently to understand. That is an embarrassment. That's a humiliation. And they're going to wear that all the way to the end. Their horrific translation of John 8:58 will stand as a monument to how bankrupt their translations are when it comes to Christologically significant texts. They absolutely mistranslate John 8:58. They fail to recognize a well-established idiom that in this article right here, I show several translations that get it right and grammars that support getting it right. It's called the New World Translation Footnotes to John 8:58, January 13, 2010. And I list here 8 grammarians, 8 Greek grammarians that Trinitarians almost never discuss or present as supporting this idiom being what I said. A Greek present with an expression of past time which gathers up the past to the present, which is appropriately represented by, before Abraham came into existence, I have been. The only way I am would be correct is if you mean by that the same thing, that his existence extends from the past to the present. But it's not proper English. We don't talk that way. We use a perfect instead of a present to represent that type of expression. J.A. Bengal, Naaman of the New Testament, Volume 2. A. Tholuck, Commentary on the Gospel of John. H.A.W. Meyer, Critical and Exegetical Handbook to the Gospel of John. G.B. Viner, A Grammar of the Idiom of the Greek New Testament. This link is in my description below. You can look up all these sources so that you know. The New World Translation is not only correct, it has the support of at least 8 Greek grammarians. F. Blass, A. de Brunner, and R.W. Funk, A Greek Grammar of the New Testament and Other Early Christian Literature. I'm the only one of the first one. Jason B. Dunn, afterward, after reading my discussion of this text, also noted this. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn other than to just say I'm correct and to point out, since there's a mistake that needs to be highlighted, that I found out because I looked it up and I looked at it carefully. When I read this grammar, I noted that in their discussion of this idiom, they cited it incorrectly. In the de Brunner, Blass, de Brunner, and Funk, a standard Greek grammar used in many Greek grammatical courses, they incorrectly cited as John 5:58, and that's why a lot of people missed it. But when I went to look up John 5:58, I realized there is no John 5:58. They meant John 8:58. So this is one that actually a lot of people before me didn't notice. I didn't notice anyone who had cited this grammar in support of the idiom that's underlying John 8:58 in the New World Translation of it. But Blass, de Brunner, and Funk also cite John 8:58, just erroneously as John 5:58, as representing this idiom. N. Turner, A Grammar of New Testament Greek, Volume 3, Syntax. J. N. Sanders and B. A. Maston, A Commentary on the Gospel of St. John, according to St. John. Kenneth L. McKay, the most recent Time and Aspect in New Testament Greek, Novum Testamentum 34, his grammar, A New Syntax of the Verb in New Testament Greek, and I Am in John's Gospel, Expository Times, 10710. Trinitarians, have your scholars and your apologists told you about this? No, they haven't, have they? Robert M. Bowman tried to talk about some of these citations and explain why he thought they were incorrect. He did the best job, at least, of representing the Trinitarian position, but he failed completely to justify the Trinitarian position and to show that John 8:58 is not an example of this idiom. It is. And in my writings, I showed that it is. I dealt with every single issue raised, an argument presented by Bowman on this issue. And no one has responded to me on these issues. Yet you Trinitarian apologists and scholars keep running around on this issue and lying to everybody, crying that the New World Translation is not fair, it's not correct, it's biased, wrong, wrong, wrong. All of those things apply to you. No matter how much learning you have failed completely to deal with these issues. We have not. We took up your challenge and we dealt with those issues. You have not. In my third edition, in my chapter on the preexistence of the Christ, and in this section, the preexistence of Christ, in John 8:58, this is my third edition. I recommend, I put links below where you can get it. You get the second and the third edition, the digital versions at least, but you can still get a hardcover printed copy of the third edition because they each contain mostly the same, but some additional information. For example, in this chapter, in my third edition, I deal with a lot of different arguments, including those by A.T. Robertson, viewing eimi as absolute, right? They think that ego eimi in John 8:58, and Bowman believes this as well, that it's just absolute. Meaning by that, it's a self-contained expression. Before Abraham was or came into existence, I am. Meaning either that he's claiming to be the great I am, which is a joke, right? Because there one is no great I am. That's based on another mistranslation from Exodus 3:14, Echye Asher Echye, which doesn't say he's the I am. At best, even if we give you I am, it's I am who I am, which is a statement about his character and what he will be as the sign. I talked about it in my text reading on Exodus 3:14. So you'd have to be blind to continue to use Exodus 3:14, which is mistranslated just like John 8:58, to help maintain this false connection between an I am that does not exist. It's talking about his character and what he will be as the sign going forward with Moses to free the Israelites. That's why the Septuagint translates it ego eimi haon, not ego eimi, I am, I am. You Trinitarians have failed in some of the most basic Hebrew and Greek grammatical ways. Again, it's embarrassing. At this point, it's an embarrassment. And you should be embarrassed. You should apologize to the New World Translation Committee. You should apologize to every single Jehovah's Witness who comes to your door for condemning their translation of John 8:58 and Exodus 3:14. Ego eimi is not absolute in John 8:58. It's a part of the idiom that those 8 grammarians I just referenced identify it as, a present of past action still in progress. Some call it different things, a durative present, or other terms that essentially denote the same thing, which means it's an extension from past, like McKay defines it, an extension from the past time in which he existed to observe Abraham, rejoicing at his day, all the way to his moment of talking with the Jews. That's why ain, won't work there. Because it's not just talking about him in the past. It's talking about him in the past and how in the past he saw what Abraham did so that in the present he could tell him about it. And so you Trinitarians go from one bankrupt argument to another, all to try to sustain a connection that does not exist. There is no I am. There's no I am in Exodus or in John. I am either introduces an understood predicate, being the equivalent of an he, who, right? Who, he, who's he? You get it from the context. The Christ, Son of Man, one born blind, or the one who existed before Abraham, the one whom Abraham looked forward to seeing, the Christ, the Messiah. That's the day that Jesus is talking about, the day of his coming. Abraham looked forward to that day. He saw that day and rejoiced. How do I know? I was there before he was even born. And I'm talking to you right now to tell you what I saw. So they're just wrong. They try to claim it's absolute, meaning in their view, eternal, which wouldn't have to be the meaning, even if it is absolute. I talk about it in these writings. So if you want more, we're not going to get into everything, but you should get my discussion in my second and third editions if you want more. I get into everything. But we will talk about a few things. So all of these grammarians who are Trinitarian like Robertson, and they don't deal with the idiom, and they either recognize it and fail to accept it, Or they just don't recognize it, right? They think it's something totally different. Either absolute, meaning he's eternal, which is not what he says there, and which contradicts other explicit texts in the Bible, John 5:26. Or they claim that I am is a name, right? If you go to the Bible Hub and you pull up John 8:58, or just many English translations off your shelf, you're going to see that they talk about it being a name, right? Some kind of title. And so it's ridiculous. It's not a name or a title. That would be incorrect English and even incorrect Greek, like I talk about in a note and like others discuss, and which I mention here. Let's read note 107 on page 277 under the extension from past idiom, which is what's in John 8:58. Some Trinitarians seem to view ego eimi as an absolute expression denoting eternal existence. We just talked about it. As well as an actual divine name. Robert Morey, Trinity Evidence and Issues. You can see my debate or listen to it in the playlist on the channels, on the front page of this channel. Claims Jesus used the divine name ego eimi in reference to himself. But Barnabas Linders, Son of Man in Johannine Christology, and Christ in the Spirit in the New Testament, in honor of Charles Francis Digby Molay, points out that ego eimi in John 8:58 cannot be regarded as a title because it requires the meaning I am in existence. To illustrate, this is me talking now, we would not say in translation, before Abraham came into existence, Jesus. Or before Abraham came into existence, God. Does that make any sense to anyone? Yet that's exactly what they're telling us when they claim I am as a name for God, and Jesus used it in John 8:58. Before Abraham came into existence, I am. That's like I am as a name, right? If it's not existential, it's ridiculous on its face. It's not how we translate. It doesn't even make sense in Greek, right? Because that's not how names are positioned. You don't attach a name to an expression of past time apart from any other qualifiers. Missing from both is I am, which is the very expression believed by Morey to be a divine name. In other words, he'd have to be saying, before Abraham came into existence, I am, I am. Ego eimi, ego eimi. Like I was talking about in Exodus 3:14. But neither one of them do that. They miss everything. All so they can try to sustain a connection, to help prop up their post-biblical doctrine, because there is no connection. I go on and discuss different examples of the idiom, the extension from past idiom. I reference and discuss a lot of the scholars that I list right here, the grammarians and others, that accept this idiom in John 8:58. This is a good article. I linked it below. Now, I have another one. I have several other things I've done on John 8:58 that I had uploaded on my topical index on the old Elihu Books website. But it's not there now because I had to remove that topical index. But they'll be back up either on the Elihu site, the new Elihu site, or on another website that I'm working on soon. So if you see any links in any of my blog articles or other writings that aren't active right now, just check back. They'll be active again, and I'll go back through and I'll replace those links with where the material is now. Here are numerous translations. I list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 translations that render John 8:58 similar to NWT and don't use I am the way many Trinitarian Bibles do. George R. Noyes, The New Testament, before Abraham was, I have been. The 20th century New Testament. Before Abraham was born, I was already what I am. And in another edition, the 1904, I was. And again, I don't think that's the best way to render this, but they're closer to NWT. And these are some of the older ones, a little bit more recent. Moffat, I have existed before Abraham was born. Clyston Lilly, I am here and I was before Abraham, right? That's a better attempt to use I am in a sense that relates it to the past expression to gather both up to show Jesus' continuing existence from that time, from before Abraham. It's not eternal. It doesn't make him eternal. It just makes him someone who existed before Abraham was born. That's it. That's all the context and explicit terminology used there allows. Anything else is read into it. He doesn't just say, I am, right? If I am was a self-contained expression, Trinitarians, meaning I'm eternal, well, then why say before Abraham was born? Why not just say, I am? If the Jews say, well, how have you seen Abraham? You're not only 50, you're not even 50. He could have just said, ego eimi. I am. Right? Means I'm eternal, according to you, Trinitarians. Self-contained expression denoting eternality. No, it doesn't mean that, right? And it clearly doesn't mean that by being attached to an adverbial expression that only goes back to a time before Abraham, not just eternally, like Bowman tries to argue. William F. Beck, I was before Abraham. Kenneth N. Taylor, this is the Living Bible. I realize not all of these are the most well accepted. Again, they're very available. And it's not like the Living Bible's always wrong. And it's not like these are bad translations, right? These are credible scholars who at least have enough Greek to know more than the Trinitarians do, who fail to translate John 8:58 properly. Even the Living Bible gets it right, Trinitarians. The Living Bible is superior to the NIV and the NASB, except for the NASB in a couple editions. In the note does put I have been. Richard Lattimore, Four Gospels and Revelation, I am from before Abraham was born. C.B. Williams, one of Dana and Mante's, or at least Mante's teachers in Greek, I believe. The New Testament, the Language of the People, 1986. I existed before Abraham was born. Kenneth L. McKay and his new syntax of the verb, I referenced it earlier in defining the idiom. But he actually translates it in his grammar, I have been in existence since before Abraham was born. Trinitarians, do you know about these translations and many more that could be cited to show I am is not the only one out there? And it really shouldn't even be out there. It's a terrible translation. It's inferior to the New World Translation. Watchtower Bible and Tract Society produced a superior translation to all these Trinitarian scholars and Bible committees. It's embarrassing when you consider how condemning they have been to the New World Translation. I go on and on. I discuss all these things. Here's where I talk about the different grammars that I just showed in my blog article that were listed. I talk about different texts that Bowman brings up. I talk about how there are actual parallels in the Old Testament that show that the translation of John 8:58 in the MWT is correct. I consider, for example, how Bengal, one of the scholars I cited earlier, cites Proverbs 8:25 as a parallel, and I believe it's perhaps the most significant parallel because it's not only dealing from the exact same section of Proverbs 8 where wisdom is talking, whom the New Testament identifies as Jesus. Jesus himself does it in Luke 11 and elsewhere, where he quotes what is said by wisdom and identifies wisdom as himself. I believe Proverbs 8:25 is the most significant parallel to John 8:58, not only because it uses the past expressions before the mountains were set, before all the hills, with a present verb, right? That's the idiom. Past expression, present verb. Extension from past idiom. That all these Trinitarian Bibles fail to get right, or they fail morally and see it right and refuse to do what's right, just like they did with the divine name. Also, because the one begotten is none other than Jesus, right? Wisdom. And then I go on to show I cite the section of my book where I point out the different parallels in the New Testament. I have a whole blog article on my Watching the Ministry blog with a chart that shows numerous parallels between Jesus and wisdom of Proverbs 8. But it's very clear that the idiom here in John 8:58 is an extension from past, a present of past action still in progress. And if you want my complete refutation of Robert M. Bowman Jr.'s Jehovah's Witnesses, Jesus Christ and the Gospel of John on this subject, get my second edition. Get my third edition. It's all there in detail. Numerous other parallels from the Old and the New Testament. I deal with Bowman's responses to some of those parallels, and nobody has given me any credible response or even any response that I'm aware of to date. Right? And we're about 20 years and counting. And yet you all continue to condemn the New World Translation, you Trinitarians, like we haven't written anything. We have. You're the ones who need to start writing. And don't just start writing, right? Anyone could do that. Do you have any credible arguments or not? Are you done? I think you're done. So stop lying to everyone. It's time you try to undo some of the horrific damage that your translations do when it comes to John 8:58 and your translation and moral failure to translate John 8:58 according to the very easily identifiable idiom. So easy to identify that not only 8 separate grammarians notice it, not only do numerous English translations notice it, but the Watchtower Society, whom you deride and make fun of, noticed it. And yet none of you did. Or if you did, your moral failure is in not accepting it. It's one or the other, Trinitarians. Which is it? Did you notice the idiom and fail to accept it and translate it properly? Moral failure. Or did you not notice the idiom and fail to translate it properly? Translation inferiority. John 8:58. As far as why they picked up stones to stone him, I talk about it again in both of those editions and elsewhere. They tried to stone him when he agreed he was the Christ before the Sanhedrin. They will stone you not just if you claim to be God, but if you claim something blasphemous like being the Son of God, as a man whom they don't even think is 50 years old, and you say that you've seen Abraham? You can't see how they would see that as blasphemous when they say Abraham's their father, and they say that he's demon-possessed, and then he says he existed before their father, someone who they think is demon-possessed. You Trinitarians fail in so many ways because of your later doctrine and your loyalty to things that are not in the Bible. And at this point, right, it would require humility on your part. Something in the Bible to accept what you have done and what you haven't done and apologize to everyone.